Hi, my name's Zach, and today I'm sharing with you 2 tips for Rachel Sklar's 2-Tip Tuesday, mom of strong-willed boys. One is one of my most common questions that I get, which is how do you take mental load off of somebody? And this is typically for children and or men that are trying to take the mental load off of the women in their lives. And the second tip is typically from the women that I get, which is how do I explain this to my partner, to my children? So one, how do we take mental load off people? This is like a really simple tool and like concept way that you can implement immediately. Oftentimes when people are coming home from work, from outside of the house, and they're wanting to be helpful, they're wanting to contribute to the home, they'll often ask, I think a really common theme is they'll ask mom, hey, how can I help out around here? Which on paper sounds great. Hey, willing to help, wanting to do something, and I'm asking you to give me the information such that you can delegate something to me that I can work on. And a lot of people have a hard time seeing how this is harmful, painful, not pleasant, or like adding mental load to that person. So I think a really common way that my experience as a math teacher helps me see is when I had my freshman geometry students. I usually had 2 tests. I had the honors students and I had the college prep students, which were a little bit easier class and the honors class a little harder. When I went to make a test for them, when maybe we had some pretty similar content, is I would either give open-ended questions or I would give multiple choice questions over here. And when you have open-ended questions, you're forced to use much more of your brain. You have to consider the numbers in the question and you have to come up with things from scratch. Versus multiple choice, you are given options. You don't actually have to do a whole lot of work. You can just choose an option and guess and hope that that comes out okay. But either way, I think anyone recognizes that if they had 2 tests and they knew that the multiple choice wasn't necessarily trying to trick them, that they would probably take the multiple choice test is going to be easier. So I want you to think of it as that way. When you are coming home saying, hey, I want to help, how can I help? That's your open-ended question. Let's look at another way of asking that same question, which is, hey, I want to help. I'm seeing X, Y, and Z. I'm seeing that the dog looks like they need to go out for a quick walk. It looks like that box over there needs to be broken down, put in the recycling bin. Looks like the trash might be getting full. I'm going to go bring out the trash. And then an added bonus is if you can say a pre-circled answer. So not only are you choosing 3 things or more to possibly execute on and communicating that to the person that you're asking the question to, but saying, hey, I'm seeing these 3 things. I think I'm gonna do this one first and then maybe these other 2, unless you have something else. So it's almost like, again, in those quizzes, you might have A, B, C, D, and E, and then E or F is like other, and then like an open response option. So it's showing that you're doing the work. It's showing that you're using your brain, you're using your eyes, that you are not simply asking to be delegated, and if they say nothing, then you're off the hook. It's showing that you are actively planning on doing something, and if they did in fact have a different priority, you can absolutely go down that route. So that's sort of number 1, is a really quick, really easy thing that you can implement. I talk about this in my videos, especially on Instagram, almost every single day. And I think if you are not implementing that, then there's a bigger problem, but that's a very implementable short tip. Number 2 here is explaining mental load to the other people. Now, first off, I want to acknowledge that it takes emotional labor to teach something. It takes emotional labor to explain something to someone, especially when you feel like they should already know it. So I don't want people coming here and saying, why are you telling us to do more emotional labor that we're already doing? This is an invitation to explain this thing if you're asking, which this is one of my most common questions, but I don't typically make videos about it unless people are asking, but this is a very typical one. So when you're going to explain mental load, I think oftentimes the best thing you can do is labeling. So if you are trying to explain to your husband, hey, like when you ask that question when you come home, that adds mental load to my plate. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm trying to be helpful. The best way that I've seen explaining this to somebody, especially if they get defensive about this, is explain to them objectively in terms of something that they already do and that they have the mental load for. If you're the one experiencing the heaviness of the mental load, you probably have a really much better understanding than your partner does. So what I would recommend, because it's often offered and explained in the context of a household and domestic labor, is I would recommend talking to them. Let's say they're a project manager in their work, is you might say, hey, you know how when Johnny comes to you every Tuesday for your weekly status meeting and he says, what are we talking about today? And then you roll your eyes and you say, hey man, just check the email that has the agenda in it. That's like one of those moments where he's adding mental load to your plate. So if you can be taking anecdotes, if you can be taking moments that stress out your partner at work or kids, like at school, similar, like if you could, I think you could easily use the example of a multiple choice versus an open response test, and saying like, how that's a little bit harder. How like no one ever hands in their test 2 minutes into the test when it's open response unless they're giving up, versus you could legitimately hand in a multiple choice test in 2 minutes. I think finding areas in their world where they are holding the mental load and you can see it is showing them that they're also holding it and that it's not just a thing that you're dealing with. Because I think a lot of people get defensive when they hear mental load because it's often offered in the context of that domestic labor, which they're probably not doing as much of. And so it feels much more like an attack. But if they see it's just an objective thing, this is just a vocabulary word and it can be applied in a lot of different places, then you have a lot of benefit in being able to acknowledge them, and they can also be using it for themselves and saying, oh, like I own the mental load of this thing. Once it's a part of your vocabulary, it's so much easier to talk about in the home, and it's much easier for them to give credit and get credit for the mental load that they're holding or managing or having be in their home. Rachel, I'm excited to work with your community in the near future. Anyone, if you have questions, comments, feel free to put them in the comments here, and or send me a DM on Instagram. I'll leave the link to that below.